A didn't pick this fight. I built a barrier. That's the whole of it. But when the neighborhood association dispatched their imitation security team to sever my cables and then attempted to seize my acreage, I responded with 8,000 volts of fully permitted Lone Star State current. They believed they could haul me before a judge. By the conclusion, they were the ones pleading for leniency. I've been on this earth long enough to understand one fundamental reality. Tranquility never endures indefinitely. Not out here. Not on soil that holds more memory than you ever will. My name is Clint Dawson, and this stretch of sun-scorched Texas earth, every stone, every mesquite stump, every post hole, has borne the legacy of my kin since 1932. My grandfather etched the initial boundary with a mule he didn't own, and hands trembling from the weight of the Depression. My father preserved this place through parched summers, sick livestock, and a twister that snatched half the barn roof, yet left the old windmill turning undisturbed. And now the duty falls to me. 120 acres. Just spacious enough to draw a full breath. Just hushed enough to hear your own thoughts. Most days begin identically. I step onto the veranda before the sun crests the hill. The air still carries a nighttime chill, scented with juniper, dust, and the remnants of the coyotes' nocturnal rounds. My boots find the same weathered grooves in the porch planks, and my old hound, Gus, pads alongside me, yawning as if we're already running late. By 6, I'm surveying the herd, tapping each water basin to listen for a drop in level. Then comes the perimeter check, post by post, the method my father instilled in me, not because I anticipate conflict, but because conflict locates you quicker if you cease your vigilance. For most of my years, that rhythm was sufficient to maintain a comfortable distance from the world. The local folks knew me. The county sheriff knew me, and the genuine neighbors respected a man who tended his soil and attended to his own affairs. But the world transformed. Or perhaps it just crept closer, right up to my front gate. When the Sierra Vista Meadows community materialized beyond my northern border, it seemed to sprout in a single night. Streets carved in rigid lines, lawns shorn to an inch of their lives, and dwellings arranged in perfect, unnatural rows that fought the land's natural contour. They paved a road where my cattle once roamed freely. They planted species ill-suited for the Texas heat, and they populated those new homes with folks who cherished the notion of rural life without accepting its raw authenticity. Initially, I paid no mind. Let them douse their grass and enforce their regulations about shutter colors and permitted birdhouse designs. That had no bearing on me. My title predated their entire subdivision. My acreage was recorded long before community associations were a flicker in some contractor's imagination. Still, something within me coiled when I watched that road being laid so near my property line. It wasn't apprehension, it wasn't fury. It was that old stockman's intuition. The sensation you get when a squall is brewing, yet the horizon remains clear. So I chose to reinforce the northern boundary. Not to challenge, not to flaunt, but to etch a definitive, robust line between a universe of manicured shrubs and a world governed by sun, earth, and exertion. I set every post myself. Treated pine with a steel core, straight as gun barrels. Strung the wire taut enough to vibrate in a strong wind. Install solar-powered cameras at 50-foot intervals. Posted notices every 10 paces. Private property. No entry. Electronic monitoring. If a person can't decipher that message, the floor isn't with the signage. When I was done, I stepped back and dusted my hands. The sun was sinking, casting the entire fence in a bronze glow stretching toward the dusk. A quiet pride settled in my chest. But calm is brittle, and some people can't abide a line they didn't authorize. It commenced subtly. A lingering stare from a passing runner, an SUV slowing for an extended look, a cluster of adolescents pointing at my cameras as if they were amusement park attractions. I disregarded it. I stayed on my land. I tended my herd. I minded what was mine. Then one morning, I opened my mailbox and discovered an envelope so sleek it seemed to fear grime. Cream-colored, embossed logo, addressed not to Clint, but to property owner, Northern Perimeter Zone. No return address, just a printed name at the bottom. Brent Shore, President, Sierra Vista Meadows Community Association. I didn't know him, had no desire to, had no need to. I stood on my porch, that envelope in my hand, the wind plucking at its corner as if whispering a warning. For the first time, I felt that storm I'd sensed weeks prior begin to coalesce. Distant, quiet, but undeniable. I opened it, read the first sentence, and let out a low, incredulous chuckle. Because whatever conflict they believed they were initiating, they had no conception of whom they were challenging. I recall standing right there on the veranda, the letter unfolded in my grasp, Gus seated at my feet, as if awaiting a ruling. The morning mist hadn't yet lifted, but my day was already tilting south. The letter was composed in a tone that strained for officiousness. Further, it was composed in a tone that strained for officiousness. I had absolutely no idea it was, and it spoke of the way it was presented as one of the most incredulous endeavors. The effects of the envelope is not impenetrable. So, the letter was composed in a tone that strained for officiousness, the kind of polished lexicon people use when they wish to command without sounding like they're commanding. It declared my newly erected barrier was non-conforming with the established visual criteria of the Sierra Vista Meadows community. It continued, stating I was obligated to dismantle unauthorized visual impediments within 30 days to maintain neighborhood cohesion. Neighborhood cohesion. That earned a derisive snort. There are many descriptors for my acreage. Rough, arid, sun-blistered, obstinate. But cohesive isn't one, and it certainly wasn't. Someone marked the wrong box on a form and sent it to the wrong man. But a fortnight later, a second envelope materialized. This one wasn't courteous. It wasn't even attempting courtesy. A larger envelope, heavier stuck, the same glossy association seal stamped on the front, mimicking an official document. I brought it inside, sat at the table, and slid my pocket knife under the seal. Gus ambled over and rested his head on my knee, as if he could scent the approaching difficulty before I finished reading. Inside was a formal notice of continued infraction, a whole packet of printed pages. Paragraphs constructed by someone who had ingested a law glossary. It stated my failure to engage constituted non-compliance. It alleged I was generating a public safety hazard. It warned the association was prepared to intensify measures. And tucked in the back, a small pixelated satellite image with a thick crimson outline drawn around the northern edge of my property, as if it belonged to them. That part didn't amuse me. I stared at that red line. Then out the window toward the ridge, a slow heat creeping up my neck. Not rage, not yet. Just that rancher's sense again, the one that tells you something is fundamentally wrong. So I replied, not on fancy stationery, not on printer paper, but on a sheet torn from a lined notepad, the sort school children use. I wrote in block letters, partly to irritate them, partly because it felt appropriate. I informed them my land was not part of Sierra Vista Meadows, never had been, never would be. I attached a photocopy of my deed, my land registration, and the historical boundary chart that's been filed longer than the combined lifespans of every person on that association's board. Then I signed the bottom. Clint Dawson, owner, independent as hell. God bless Texas. I folded it, slipped it into a plain envelope, and mailed it. For a week or two, silence returned. The kind of quiet that makes you hope perhaps reason has triumphed. But genuine trouble doesn't announce itself. It doesn't call in advance. It doesn't leave a message. Sometimes it scales your fence in plain sight. Sometimes it carries cheers. And sometimes it arrives wearing a polo shirt with an imitation security emblem stitched on the chest. But I wasn't aware of that yet, because back then, sitting at my kitchen table with the second letter beside my plate, I thought the squall was receding. It turns out it was merely consolidating its force. It was a Thursday afternoon when the first motion alert vibrated on my phone. I remember because I was knee-deep in mud, wrestling a stubborn water valve that had dripped since spring. Gus issued a single sharp bark and looked north. I pulled off my gloves, swiped the phone screen, and the camera feed appeared. Two men stood right at my fence line, association polos, tucked into khaki trousers, as if headed to a landscaping firm interview. One was lanky, the sort who looked like a strong Texas gale would topple him. The other, stockier, flushed, built like a man who'd spent more time vocalizing than laboring. Both clutched clipboards. That alone revealed all I required. There's a specific breed of man who wields a clipboard like a credential, as if holding one grants him unearned power. The skinny one was snapping pictures between the slats. Click, 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 as if my fence were a crime scene. The larger one trailed his hand along the top rail like he owned it. Then I witnessed the pivotal moment. The larger man placed a boot on the lower beam, gripped the fence top, and began to climb. Didn't read the sign directly before him. Didn't care he was stepping onto private ranch land. Didn't consider knocking. Just ascended. Slow, deliberate, like a raccoon with a badge. I didn't yell, didn't rush out, didn't utter a word. I simply observed, because one lesson my grandfather drilled into me was this: never confront a fool before you've gathered your proof. So, I saved the video, tagged the file, moved it to a secured folder with a name only I would know. About 10 minutes later, the two men climbed down, scribbled on their clipboards, and strolled off toward the development road without a concern. You'd think that would have concluded it. But a few days later, I discovered the first tangible sign This wasn't merely an overzealous association conducting a drive-by. I was walking the fence line after a windstorm, checking for damage, when I noticed it. The top wire severed cleanly, not frayed, not broken by weather, but cut. The snip was smooth, positioned high, executed with cable cutters. Unmistakable. Someone had leaned in, right beneath the no trespassing sign, and clipped it like a stray branch. I stood there a long moment, thumb hooked in my belt, staring at the orange-tagged post marking my boundary. My land doesn't surrender clues easily, but when it does, you pay heed. I pulled up the camera feed again, scrolled back, and there he was. The same man, the same association polo, moving along the fence like a possum on a mission, glancing about, crouching, cutting. That was the tipping point. Laughing at a letter is one matter. Watching a grown man trespass with cutting tools is entirely another. So that evening, after feeding the steers, I filed my first police report. Officer Jensen rolled down my driveway about 20 minutes later. His cruiser made that familiar trench on the gravel, a sound I've known since boyhood. Jensen's a good man. Helped me corral stray cattle once. Never asked for a thing. He stepped out, stretched, leaned on the hood. "All right, Clint," he said, "what have we got?" I handed him the printouts. He let out a low, drawn-out whistle. "This is criminal trespass," he stated. "And that, right there," he pointed at the frame with the cutters, "is property damage." I nodded. "Figured you'd say that." Jensen adjusted his hat, gazing north toward the new houses dotting the ridge. "These association folks," he muttered, "they forget where the asphalt ends." He wasn't mistaken. And as I stood there in the fading evening light, looking across land my family has held since 1932, a quiet resolve solidified in my chest. Not fury, not fear, but determination. Because now I understood something I hadn't before. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a test. And they were about to learn they'd chosen the wrong fence to interfere with. The kind where the air grows heavy, the cicadas fall silent, and the moon resembles a paired sliver. I just secured the barn when the first motion alert buzzed on my phone. 12:47 a.m. Gus's ears perked before I even illuminated the screen. Camera 6, north fence, infrared mode. A solitary figure moved along the boundary, slow, crouched, cautious, hood up, backpack secured, every step deliberate, as if he'd walked this line before. And then his hand, even through grainy night vision, I recognized the shape. Cable cutters. I froze the feed, zoomed in. My jaw tightening. Same build, same footwear, same gait. The same association patrolman from the daytime intrusion. Except tonight, he fancied himself clever. Hoodie instead of polo. Scarf instead of a badge. But fools don't grow wiser at midnight. They merely grow more audacious. I unpaused, watched him reach up, align the cutters, and squeeze. Snap. A clean cut. But what he didn't know, what I had anticipated, was that I'd replaced that very section 2 days prior with a decoy wire linked to a small die pack. Not injurious, not hazardous, just messy. And just as he leaned through the gap, pop, a sharp, satisfying burst of pressure. The camera captured the cloud perfectly. A brilliant, absurd eruption of neon orange dye, splattering across his sweatshirt, face, and backpack like a paint factory had convulsed on him. He stumbled back, flailing his arms, slipping in the dirt, cursing loudly enough for the microphone to capture half the words and imply the rest. Then he fled, swift as a man who just realized his morning was about to be profoundly unpleasant. I saved the clip, filed it, printed frames. I even kept the audio where he yelled, "Ah, hell, he set us up." That one I intended to use. I was still organizing the files when headlights swept across my porch. A familiar truck engine rumbled to a stop. Not Jensen. Sheriff Vance, a large man with kind eyes and boots older than half the county. He stepped out slowly, hat in hand. "Clint," he said, his voice low. "Got a report of a suspicious character sprinting through Sierra Vista Meadows, orange as a pumpkin. Figured I'd check with you first." I simply handed him the tablet. He watched the clip without a word. Didn't flinch, didn't rush. When the die pack detonated and the man fell back, Vance released a long exhale through his nose, the way a man does when something is equally idiotic and foreseeable. "Well," he finally said, "that there is criminal trespass. No question. Maybe attempted vandalism, too." I nodded. "Thought you'd say that." He walked to the fence, shone his flashlight on the warning signs I posted every 10 feet. "Electric?" he asked. "Not yet," I said. "Legal when I do, though. Agricultural use, certified, Section 119. Vance smiled. Not a friendly smile, a knowing one. "I'll note that in my report," he said. "Make it plain. You're within your rights. These association fellas, they forget country land doesn't operate by their little rule books." He tipped his hat, looking north toward the development. "Clint, this won't be their last attempt. They didn't get what they wanted tonight." I folded my arms. "And what do you reckon they wanted?" Vance gave me a long, steady look. "Not your fence," he said. "Your land." He climbed back into his truck, rolled down the window before driving off. "You call me if they return. And Clint, be prepared." When his tail lights vanished, the night felt altered, as if a line had been crossed. Not by me, but by them. And from that moment forward, this wasn't a disagreement. It was a confrontation. The morning after the die pack incident, the sky was still slate gray when Gus started barking. Not his standard stranger on the road bark. Not the coyote warning, either. This was the sharp staccato alert he reserved for when something felt deeply amiss. I stepped onto the porch with my coffee, and that's when I saw it. A black SUV rolling slowly down my driveway. Not the sheriff, not a neighbor. Too pristine, too polished, too alien on gravel. The SUV halted and a man emerged, who looked like he pressed his posture each morning. Creased trousers, leather shoes, hair combed with geometric exactness. He carried a leather portfolio, the sort city men use to feign importance. He surveyed my ranch as if appraising it for auction. Then he manufactured a smile. "Mr. Dawson," he said, extending a hand I didn't accept. "Brent Shore, president of the Sierra Vista Meadows Community Association." So, the man now had a face. He wasn't tall, he wasn't robust, but he exuded a specific brand of confidence. The kind constructed on documents and signatures, not soil and sweat. "What can I do for you?" I asked. He removed his sunglasses, and that smile grew thinner. "Well, let's just say last night prompted some concern." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean the trespassing?" He waved a hand as if shooing a gnat. "A misunderstanding." That single word told me everything I needed to know. He hadn't come to discuss the offense. He'd come because someone returned home stained orange and complaining. "Anyway," he continued, "I'm here to propose something mutually advantageous." Mutually advantageous. That phrase ought to be printed on a red flag. I kept my expression neutral, but internally I was already reaching for the small digital recorder in my shirt pocket, an old habit from my service days. A buddy taught me, never enter a negotiation without a record. I thumbed the recorder on. "Go on," I said. Brent cleared his throat, clasping his hands as if he'd rehearsed this before a mirror. "Look, Clint. May I call you Clint?" "No." "Right. Mr. Dawson. The residents of Sierra Vista Meadows, well, they weren't anticipating a tall timber fence adjacent to their property line." "Not their property line," I corrected. "It's mine." He chuckled with feigned politeness, ignoring the correction. "So, here's my proposition. Just hear me out. What if we relieved you of this burden, the northern strip, perhaps 30-40 feet? We could acquire it at a very equitable price. Less for you to maintain, provides us space to enhance the neighborhood buffer." I took a slow sip of coffee. "How much?" I asked, keeping my tone flat. He brightened like a salesman sensing a close deal. "We could offer $50,000, straight cash buyout. Quick, clean, fiscally beneficial." I nodded slowly. "And what occurs if I decline?" His eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, just enough to reveal the mask. "Well, then the association might have to persist with filing safety grievances, fence violations, environmental worries. You know how these matters can prolong." There it was. The quiet part, voiced just loudly enough for a recorder to capture. I looked him directly in the eye. "You threatening me, Brent?" He forced a laugh. "Oh, no, nothing of the sort. Merely presenting solutions. You see, when situations become difficult, it's often preferable to settle things discreetly. No need for attorneys, no need for escalation." I let the silence stretch, long and heavy, and I stepped closer, just a single boot length. "You came onto my land, tried to purchase what isn't for sale, and tried to intimidate me using fabricated safety reports." He swallowed. "I wouldn't phrase it that way." "I would. This was about land. My land. And Brent Shore had just identified himself as my adversary. I didn't sleep much that night, not from fear. Fear departed my being the year I deployed. But because of a slow, quiet anger that settles behind your ribs and bides its time. By sunrise, I knew precisely what was required. You see, when someone attempts to redraw your borders, literally sketching your land on a map like a child with a red marker, you don't debate them. You visit the people who maintain the authentic maps. So I fed the steers, collected my documents folder, whistled for Gus to hop in the truck bed, and drove into town. The county building occupies a corner lot behind the post office. Same location since the 1950s. Brick faded by sun, gutters drooping, flag flapping lazily in the morning breeze. Inside, behind the front counter, sat Beatrice. The same Beatrice who's worked there since I was a youngster. The same woman whose grandfather shoed my grandfather's horses. The sort of Texan who knows the county better than any satellite. She glanced up from her desk, smiling without rising. "Well, if it isn't Clint Dawson. Trouble trailing you, or are you trailing it?" I placed the stack of association letters on the counter. "Bit of both," I said. She adjusted her glasses, flipped through the envelopes, then nodded as if she'd already predicted the ending. "Been hearing about those Sierra Vista folks. They're enthusiastic." "That's one term for it," I muttered. "All right," she said, wheeling her chair back to the ancient computer. Click, click. A long beep from the archaic scanner. Then the large county map materialized on screen. Green, tan, white patches, all outlined in thin black lines like a quilt. Beatrice tapped one corner with her pencil. "Here's your land, just as it's been since 1932. And the association." She zoomed out, scrolled north, then indicated a faded dotted line. "Here, Sierra Vista Meadows concludes right at this marker. That appears a considerable distance south of my fence." 43 feet, she confirmed. 43 feet of land they'll never touch unless you gift it to them. Something loosened in my chest. Not relief, just confirmation of what I already knew. Beatrice turned to me, eyebrows raised. "You want a printout?" she asked. "2 copies," I said. "One for me, one for someone who needs to read it slowly." "Oh, honey," she chuckled, "I'll laminate them." 5 minutes later, she handed me 2 freshly laminated parcel maps, clear as daylight, stamped, certified, irrefutable. "Clint," she said, her voice dropping, "these association types don't comprehend land. They comprehend paperwork. And this," she tapped the map, "is the paperwork that ends disputes." I thanked her, loaded Gus back up, and drove straight home. Before lunch, I mailed 1 laminated copy to Brent Shaw's office. No elaborate letter, no message, just a bright yellow sticky note affixed to the front. "Cease trespassing. You're outside your jurisdiction." I returned to the house, poured a fresh cup of coffee, and stood on the porch, watching dust drift across the pasture. That was the moment the shift occurred. Until then, I'd been reacting. But with that map in my possession, with county-certified proof more potent than any association covenant, I felt the ground stabilize beneath me once more. They'd been attempting to combat me with counterfeit authority. Now I possessed the genuine article. And when men like Brent lose the paper battle, they don't retreat, they intensify. I knew the storm wasn't over, but now I finally had lightning on my side. With the laminated map dispatched and the county's stance unequivocal, I understood one thing for certain. The paperwork phase had concluded. The next chapter wouldn't be written with ink. So that afternoon, I hitched the trailer, loaded Gus into the truck, and drove into town to purchase every groundant state-certified component required for a legal Texas agricultural electric fence. Old Walter at the supply counter squinted at my cart laden with insulators, grounding rods, a solar energizer, and a stack of yellow warning signs tall as a hay bale. "Going electric now, Clint?" Seems I've got neighbors who don't grasp plain wire and courteous signage. He nodded, asking nothing further. Old ranchers recognize when not to pry. Back on my land, I walked the northern boundary slowly. The air was warm. Wind carried that faint juniper scent, forever linked to my grandfather's shed. Old tools, old wisdom, still relevant. I reinforced the posts first, checked the line tension, drove the grounding rods deep into the earth, mounted the solar energizer on the post I'd positioned months earlier for this precise purpose. Then came the wire, high tensile steel core, stretched until it emitted a thin, metallic whisper in the breeze. A sound only ranchers detect. A sound that declares, this barrier is serious. I tested the voltage. Perfect. Sufficient to deliver a loud, memorable message, not enough to harm anyone not striving to be imprudent. By sundown, I stapled the final warning sign. Electric fence. Agricultural use. Do not touch. Every 10 feet. reflective paint, no excuses. When I activated the energizer, a low hum traveled the fence's length like an invisible resonance. Gus tilted his head at the sound, then settled in the grass. Approval, in ranch dog fashion. For the first time in weeks, I felt composed, not finished, not secure, but anchored. And right on cue, the storm came calling. The next morning, while repairing an irrigation joint, my tablet buzzed with a motion alert. Camera 2, northwest corner. I wiped my hands, tapped the screen, and there they were. The same 2 association security personnel from the trespass weeks prior. Matching sky blue polos, matching sunglasses despite the incomplete sunrise, matching overconfidence. They strutted up to my fence like deputies from a bargain catalog. The lanky one leaned toward a knothole, peering through as if expecting to catch me interring treasure. The stockier one placed his full palm on the top rail. And then, zap! A crisp, beautiful crack split the quiet morning. The man's body jolted as if he'd embraced a hornet's nest. His hat sailed off. His clipboard followed. He emitted a noise no grown man should produce in public. A hybrid of a yelp and a high-pitched whistle. His companion froze solid, eyes wide, mouth agape. Then he dropped his phone in the dirt and scrambled backward like a man who just confirmed the stove is indeed hot, despite all warnings. I replayed the moment twice, not from malice, but because it was evidence. Proof they trespassed. Proof the fence functioned. Proof they weren't finished with me. And I wasn't finished with them. I saved the clip, backed it up to 3 drives, printed still frames for good measure. While the electric hum drifted along the boundary, Gus sat beside me, tail flicking, almost amused. "He ain't the last one, boy," I said. Gus huffed as if he already knew, because here's the truth about bullies clad in association polos. They don't surrender when they're mistaken. They redouble their efforts. So I stood there at the edge of my land, arms crossed, the sun climbing over the juniper ridge, and I felt the next phase approaching like a dust cloud on a summer highway. They would return to protest. They would return enraged, and they would bring reinforcements. But what I didn't yet know was that tomorrow, when they appeared, they wouldn't be alone. A news crew would be trailing them. In that was the day everything became public. The advantage of living out here is you can hear trouble long before it arrives at your doorstep. The following morning, I heard it before Gus even lifted his head. Gravel popping under aggressive tires. A little too rapid, a little too furious. I stepped onto the porch, coffee mug warm in my hand, and sure enough, a gleaming black SUV rolled up my driveway as if it owned the place. Brent, pressed khakis, polished loafers never meant for soil. A smile that didn't touch his eyes. The man emerged holding a manila folder like a sheriff's star. He didn't even glance at the scenery, the open pasture, the quiet wind, the vast horizon. People like him never do. They're too fixated on what they aim to acquire. He marched directly toward my porch. "Mr. Dawson," he called, adjusting his sunglasses. "We need to address an urgent violation." I took a slow sip of coffee. Unhurried, unblinking. "Morning to you too, Brent." He pretended not to hear. Selective hearing is a skill association people excel at. "I've received reports," he tapped the folder, "that you've installed an illegal electrified barrier on a community-adjacent boundary. This breaches safety codes, public access expectations, and Section 4B of the Ridgeview Community Guidelines concerning shared aesthetics. I snorted. It's my land, Brent, not your community, and that fence is 100% legal. Sheriff Vance approved it himself. Brent removed his sunglasses as if this were intimidation. Clint, listen carefully. I'm providing you an opportunity to avoid a substantial fine and potential escalation to civil court. Dismantle the fence today. I set my coffee cup on the railing, the faintest tap against the wood. And if I don't? I asked. Brent straightened his spine. Then the board will pursue formal action, and believe me, there will be repercussions. I smiled, a small tight smile designed to unsettle. You already dispatched 2 of your security boys to sever it. One of them hollered like a stuck pig when the line bit him. You ought to teach him to read signs. Brent's face twitched, just slightly. He hadn't anticipated my knowledge. He certainly hadn't expected my evidence. He opened his mouth to retort, when a new sound reached us both. Tires on gravel, fast. Not angry this time, but eager. A white van rounded the bend, slid to a halt, and 2 individuals leaped out with cameras, microphones, and the wired excitement only news crews possess when they send a compelling story. Channel 7 Newsline. Brent's worst nightmare. The reporter, a woman in her 40s with confident strides, approached, mic raised. Mr. Dawson, we received a tip that the HOA attempted to remove legally installed agricultural fencing on private property. Are you willing to comment? Brent spun toward her, panic spreading beneath his skin like a stain. This is a private matter, he snapped. You can't be here. You're trespassing on... It's Clint's land, I interjected calmly. He invited no one. Y'all drove onto my property without permission. But they, I nodded toward the news crew, are on the public turnaround right behind the cedar line, perfectly lawful. Brent's jaw clenched hard. The reporter turned to him. Sir, are you with the Ridgeview HOA? I serve as president, he said stiffly. Did your officers attempt to breach Mr. Thorson's fence yesterday morning? That is a gross mischaracterization. Because, she interrupted, we were sent a video showing 2 Ridgeview security personnel approaching the boundary, one appearing to touch the wire despite visible warning signs. We understand the fence complies with the Texas Agricultural Code. Brent blinked, visibly perspiring now. Access to community space must remain uniform. There is no community space on my land, I stated softly. The reporter glanced between us, sensing the tension rising like heat from Ashford. Mr. Shaw, can you clarify why your HOA believes it holds authority over acreage the county records list as privately deeded to Clint Dawson? And can you confirm reports that you approached him with an unsolicited offer to purchase a portion of his northern property last week? Brent stammered. He misinterpreted. And right there, that stammer, that fracture, was when the camera zoomed in. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The news crew circled him like curious hawks, pelting him with follow-up questions, each sharper than the last. Brent tried to talk over them, tried to wave the folder, tried to drown in excuses faster than he could fabricate them. But once a man begins dissolving on camera, there's no halting the meltdown. Eventually, he stormed back to his SUV. No triumphant speech, no threat, no dignity. Someone inside the van whispered, "Got it," every second. Before they departed, the reporter turned to me. Mr. Dawson, we may follow up. If this escalates, the public will want transparency. I tipped my hat. "Ma'am, I've got nothing to conceal." Gus barked once, as if in accord. The van rolled away. The dust settled, and I knew then this was no longer Clint versus the HOA. This was public. This was pressure. This was the shot heard throughout the county. But what I didn't yet know was that Brent wouldn't accept humiliation passively. Tomorrow, he'd return with something far worse than cameras. He'd return with attorneys. I spent the next morning engaged in an activity most people never associate with ranch work: assembling a legal arsenal. Not firearms, not barbed wire, not voltage. Paperwork. The sort of paperwork that sinks vessels. I arranged everything across my dining table, the one my grandfather constructed from reclaimed barn timber in '63. Sunlight from the kitchen window illuminated each folder perfectly. Association letters, the laminated county map Beatrice printed, photographs of the severed fence, time-stamped screenshots from my camera system, and that splendid orange dye splatter image from the nocturnal intruder who believed he was invisible. I began sorting them into piles like ammunition: exhibits, reports, evidence, timeline. Each piece carried weight. Each piece narrated a story the association wasn't prepared to hear. But the final folder, that one was the decisive blow. Inside resided two items: the audio recording of Brent's attempted coercion and a developer's access road schematic I'd obtained from a sympathetic surveyor who disliked being deceived by suits. That sketch revealed precisely why Brent wanted my fence gone. Not aesthetics, not community harmony. They desired a road through my land to access a larger development project. It was avarice, pure and unadorned. I stared at that folder for a long moment, the way a man regards a loaded cartridge before chambering it. This was no longer self-defense. This was a counteroffensive. I picked up the phone and dialed David Torres. He answered on the second ring, his voice rough, like gravel under a tire. "Well, damn, I'm elbow deep in my Chevy's carburetor, and you call." That usually means someone's about to get litigated into the next geological era. "HOA lawyer paid a visit," I said. Dropped a threat packet thicker than a church hymnal. David released a dry laugh. "Let me guess. Kensington, slick hair, smells like he bathes in filtered city water. That's the one." Typical. Brent loves hiring guys who never sweat. He paused. "All right, hermano, what's the real issue?" "He's trying to resurrect some future access corridor claim. Says my fence is obstructing community expansion." David barked a laugh loud enough to vibrate my eardrum. "Oh, hell no. They're still running that antique scam? Clint, I defeated that argument in 10, 15, and just last year. These association types recycle bad ideas like yard sale blenders. You free Monday?" "I am." "For you? I'll cancel breakfast and garage time. My wife will curse me in 2 languages, but she'll endure." "You're gonna need a sizable briefcase," I said. "I'm bringing 2. And Clint, listen." His voice shifted lower. Calm. Deadly calm. The tone he used overseas when warning of an incoming sandstorm or mortar round. "You've got the truth, the dirt, and the law on your side. They've got ego and PowerPoint. Bullies don't frighten me. Especially HOA bullies." Something settled inside my chest. Not comfort. Resolve. "See you Monday," I said. "You better." "And Clint?" "Yeah, I'm wearing my lucky boots. The ones I wear when I know somebody's about to lose." I hung up and looked back at the table. The map? The photos, the folders stacked like defensive ramparts. Outside, the wind swept across the pasture, brushing the pine posts of my fence line. The same fence line that had become a symbol in this town. The line where a rancher finally informed an HOA they'd overstepped. Monday was approaching, and with David Torres entering that courthouse beside me, I knew one thing for certain. They weren't prepared for the conflict they'd instigated. David Torres arrived just after sunrise, rumbling down my driveway in his dust-coated Silverado, the same truck he'd driven since we left the service. I heard the engine before I saw him, that familiar low growl of a V8 resembling a weary bull rousing. He stepped out, boots meeting gravel with the weight of a man primed for battle. His hair was a bit longer, but his eyes remained sharp as a fence staple. "Morning, Hermano," he said, holding up a thermos. "Brought coffee potent enough to strip paint from a tractor." "You'll need it," I said. "I've got the battlefield arranged inside." We entered the house, proceeding directly to the dining table. Covered edge to edge with folders, printed maps, camera stills, screenshots, and the laminated county map Beatrice had proudly declared indisputable. David halted halfway to the table and whistled. Well, I'll be damned. "Clint, this isn't evidence. This is artillery." He began flipping through the piles, careful, methodical, the way he used to inspect radio frequencies before patrols overseas. Association letters, photographs, timestamps, fence damage, trespass footage. He tapped one folder with his finger. "You even printed the orange die shot. Nice. Judges appreciate visual drama." Then he froze. His eyes landed on the folder I'd set apart, the one containing the audio and the access road sketch. "What's this?" he asked. "Open it," I said. He did, and he ceased breathing for half a second. "Where the hell did you acquire this?" he whispered. "Surveyor acquaintance. Didn't appreciate being misled by association board members." David leaned back in his chair, jaws set as if he'd discovered a loaded ace at the deck's bottom. "This isn't a fence dispute." He taps the sketch firmly. "They want a road, a feeder lane. Probably leads to a larger subdivision or a golf resort contract." "Exactly, and they try to cut your wire and pressure you into selling the land quietly. Classic maneuver." He shook his head. "But that audio, Clint, that's the nail in their coffin." He looked at me, his expression a blend of respect and disbelief. "You realize what you've constructed here?" "A fence?" I asked. "No," he said. "A case, a genuine one. Hell, Clint, half the attorneys I know don't prepare this thorough. If you weren't a rancher, you'd make one hell of an investigator." I shrugged. "Land teaches you to observe." He grinned. "And the military taught you to document everything." We spent the next 2 hours engaged in something that felt half like legal strategy, half like planning a battlefield assault. David sorted the evidence into 3 stacks: defense, offense, fatal blows. "That audio, fatal blow," he said. "This sketch?" He held it up like a sheriff displaying a stolen wallet. "Also fatal blow. And the video of their guy severing my wire, that goes into offense. Strong offense." He retrieved his laptop, an aged, battered device adorned with stickers from past cases and a faded Marine Corps emblem. "All right," he said, cracking his knuckles. "Let's draft your counterclaim." He began typing, muttering under his breath as he composed: "Trespass, willful property destruction, attempted coercion, false legal threat, misuse of HOA authority." Then he paused. "You know," he said, We're not merely petitioning the court to dismiss their complaint. No? No. With the suing damages. How much? He looked up at me with that grin I recalled from a dozen dust storms and 2 excessive bar fights. I'm considering 6 figures. I raised an eyebrow. 6 figures for a fence dispute. For what they did, for what they attempted. Clint, they cut your fence. They threatened you. They lied. They tried to buy you out under duress. And they misrepresented land boundaries. He taps the sketch. This is premeditated expansion fraud. I've litigated cases for less and emerged with nearly 200,000. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the old boards creak beneath me. So, what figure are we targeting? David typed a final line, then rotated the laptop toward me. Does 135,000 seem equitable? He asked. I stared at the number. It wasn't about the currency. It was about the principle. It was about the soil my grandfather bequeathed me. The soil I'd bled on, perspired on, and refused to relinquish. Yeah, I said, it's equitable. David closed the laptop, the snap sounding like a sealed verdict. We'll file this tomorrow, he said. And Clint? Yeah. Once this lands in their inbox, they'll panic. They'll attempt something foolish. They invariably do. I nodded. Let him try. He smiled, slow and dangerous. That's why I brought my lucky boots. The Travis County Courthouse possessed that familiar odor, lemon-scented floor wax, aged paper, an air so desiccated it seemed to hold opinions. I hadn't been here in years. The last occasion, I was testifying for a neighbor whose cattle had been stolen. This time, I wasn't a witness. I was the defendant, at least on paper. David and I passed through the double doors like 2 men stepping onto a battlefield we'd already memorized. We weren't anxious, merely prepared. The room was crowded. Sierra Vista Meadows residents occupied the first 2 rows, rigid-backed and murmuring like a disturbed henhouse. Their safety team officer, the same individual who had embraced my electric fence, sat up front, wearing his vest, chin tucked, appearing to expect a claim. On my side, a handful of ranchers, people I didn't recognize. They nodded at me the way country people do when one of their own is drawn into an unprovoked fight. Judge Eleanor Hart entered, petite, sharp-eyed, with a presence that could quiet livestock. The room stilled. Sierra Vista Meadows Community Association versus Mr. Clinton Dawson, she announced. The HOA attorney, Kensington, slick hair, cologne dense enough to stun a mule, stood first. Your Honor, we are here because Mr. Dawson erected a hazardous electrified barrier that violates community safety standards and endangers. David rose smoothly, like a sunrise. Your Honor, if I may, we'd prefer to present our evidence sequentially to prevent confusion. The judge nodded. Proceed. David reached for the laminated county parcel map, the one Beatrice had proudly printed and sealed as if for a museum. He placed it on the display screen. This is the official county map, he said. It clearly delineates Mr. Dawson's property line. It also shows the HOA boundary, which concludes 43 feet south of his fence. The judge narrowed her eyes. So, the HOA holds no legal jurisdiction over his land. Correct, Your Honor. Kensington attempted to stand, but the judge curtailed him with a single raised hand. Do you contest the accuracy of the county's own records? He swallowed hard. We believe there may be. No discrepancies exist here. Her voice cracked like a whip. The map is unambiguous. A soft wave of murmuring rippled through the courtroom. The foundation was laid. David clicked a remote. The lights dimmed slightly. He played the night vision footage of the HOA patrolman, the same fellow now seated in the front row, creeping along my fence, cutters in hand, snipping the top wire before squeezing through like a determined possum. When the clip of him being shocked played, the same officer slid so low in his seat he nearly vanished beneath the bench. Someone behind me snorted, suppressing laughter. David let the silence linger long enough to sting. "This," he stated calmly, "is not an inspection or a compliance check. This is trespassing and property destruction." The judge stared at the security man until he appeared ready to dissolve. "Mr. Kensington, is that your client's employee?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, Your Honor." It deteriorated further for him. David retrieved his phone, connected it to the speaker, and pressed play. Brent's voice stilled the room. "We can make this all disappear. A developer could purchase the northern strip. You walk away wealthier. We maintain the peace." Then my voice, "You trying to buy me out?" Brent again. "Just presenting options. No court, no drama." A woman in the HOA row gasped. Another whispered, "Brent, what did you do?" Judge Hart leaned forward. "Mr. Sure. Were you attempting to negotiate a land acquisition while simultaneously preparing to litigate against the property owner?" Brent opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. The judge looked as if she wished to strike him with the gavel itself. David wasn't finished. He lifted the final folder, the one I'd obtained from the surveyor friend, and opened it with the care of a man unveiling a coffin lid. "This," he said, placing the developer sketch on the screen, "is the genuine motive." The courtroom leaned forward collectively. The sketch was simple yet damning. A feeder road cutting directly through my northern pasture, leading straight into a planned expansion zone. Then David pointed to the bottom corner. "Your Honor, note the date on this blueprint, March 14th. He paused. "That is 2 months before Mr. Dawson received his first violation letter." A wave of realization swept the room. They didn't discover a violation. David stated, "They manufactured one to clear a path for this expansion." Judge Hart stared at the blueprint as if it had personally insulted her lineage. She removed her glasses slowly, folded them, and set them down. "That," she said, "is premeditated misuse of authority." Then she looked directly at Brent. "In Texas, Mr. Shore, we do not confiscate land with paper any more than we do with wire fences. You are fortunate Mr. Dawson employed only electricity." A few ranchers behind me murmured agreement. One even uttered a quiet amen. The courtroom held its breath as Judge Hart delivered her verdict. "Mr. Dawson," she said, "your fence is fully lawful under the Texas Farm and Ranch Land Protection Act. Your land lies outside the HOA's jurisdiction. You are awarded $135,000 in damages, inclusive of legal fees, repairs, and emotional distress." Brent closed his eyes as if struck by a shovel. "As for the Sierra Vista Meadows Community Association," the judge continued, "you are hereby ordered to issue a formal public apology and are permanently prohibited from any further regulatory attempts on Mr. Dawson's property." She paused, allowing her next words to cut deeply. "And Mr. Sure, your conduct will be referred to the district attorney for view." A hush enveloped the entire courtroom. David leaned toward me, his voice barely audible. "Told you the boots work." I nearly smiled. Nearly. The courthouse dust had scarcely settled when David and I re-emerged outside. The sky was vast and elevated. That bold Texas azure that makes a man feel the world is larger than his troubles. A breeze stirred, warm and constant, carrying the faint scent of juniper and distant hay. David clapped a hand on my shoulder. "You did good, Armando." "You too," I said. He grinned. "Didn't I tell you the boots work?" I shook my head, but a smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. We exchanged farewells. David climbed into his Silverado and rumbled down the street. He didn't glance back. He didn't need to. Some men depart as if they know their work is completed correctly. I drove home, the road unfurling beneath my tires as it always had, like a living memory. But the ranch felt different when I pulled into the driveway. Not larger, not grander, just more steadfast. As if it had planted its boots in the dirt and declared, "This land endures." When I stepped onto the porch, my old dog Gus lifted his head, his tail thumping once, as if too dignified to show he'd missed me. I scratched his ears and settled into my rocking chair. The sun was already descending, painting everything in that honey-orange glow unique to Texas. For the first time in months, I breathed easily. The repercussions arrived swiftly. By the next morning, my email inbox resembled a burst seed bag. Messages spilled everywhere. Some were congratulations. Some were gratitude from strangers. Some were pure outrage directed at the HOA, typed in caps lock, like an enraged uncle assaulting his keyboard. But the meaningful ones originated from people I'd never met. A rancher in Blanco County wrote, "Clint, they're attempting the same scheme here. Your case provides us hope." A woman outside Waco stated, "Thank you for standing firm. My parents lost land to a developer in '99. I wish they'd had someone like you then." And one simple message, came from a young rancher in a neighboring county, Howard Kim. "Mr. Dawson, I believe I require assistance." I called him. Howard's situation mirrored mine before it turned loud. A new development encroaching, an HOA overreaching, threatening letters, border disputes, quiet intimidation. So I invited him over. He arrived that Saturday, a slender young man, perhaps 26, hats overly large, boots too new, but his hands bore the marks of someone who worked the land, blisters and grit embedded in the knuckles. We walked to the north pasture as the evening sun cast a golden blanket over everything. Gus trotted alongside, supervising. Howard studied the fence line, the pine posts driven deep, the reflective electric warning signs catching the light. He absorbed it all without speaking. Finally he asked, "Were you frightened when they first targeted you?" I considered it briefly. "No," I said, "but I disliked it." "Why not?" he asked. "Because it wasn't a fair fight. They had paper, meetings, committees, people who never touch soil, dictating what my land should be. That's what chafes." He nodded slowly. "So what did you do?" I tapped the fence post. I constructed a line they couldn't cross, morally or legally. I didn't initiate a war, son, but I didn't permit one to overrun me, either. He swallowed hard. "I want to do what you did." "You will," I said, "but you won't do it alone." That evening, Howard stayed for supper. Cornbread, smoked brisket, pinto beans, the standard. He spoke of his father, who'd passed the ranch to him, how the place wasn't extensive but was theirs, how he didn't want to forfeit it to individuals who viewed it as a future amenity buffer. After he departed, I sat on the porch again, gazing across the pasture, illuminated silver by moonlight. That's when the concept took form. Not loud, not sudden, just steady, like fence wire being drawn taut. A network. A coalition of landowners sharing maps, evidence, counsel, support, not to combat HOAs, but to hold those the presumed authority beyond their station. David adored the idea. He drafted templates, cease and desist letters, boundary affirmations, trespass notifications, all polished and legal. Pro bono, he said, for the cause. Diana from Channel 7 loved it too. She produced a segment titled The Perimeter Alliance, When Neighbors Defend Their Land. I never anticipated a local reporter casting me as some folk hero, but she did. Within a month, 4 additional ranchers joined. An elderly couple contesting a buffer beautification order. A goat farmer who discovered association volunteers trimming his property without consent. A Vietnam veteran exasperated by drones surveilling his barn. We convened weekly, sometimes here, sometimes elsewhere, drinking coffee, exchanging stories, passing around maps like tactical plans. And gradually, something transformed. Not the land, not the law, but how people perceived themselves. Less isolated, more rooted. We named it the Perimeter Alliance. The name endured. As for Sierra Vista Meadows, they collapsed faster than damp cardboard. The apology they attempted to post at 2 a.m. satisfied no one, especially not Diana. She aired a follow-up questioning why an HOA with nothing to conceal would post its apology while the state slept. Brent Shaw resigned before a vote could oust him. Rumors spread that no developer in Austin would engage him again. Something about being the man who lost to a rancher with a solar-powered zap fence. That's a reputation you can't shed. About 6 weeks post-trial, I was walking my fence line at sunrise, the cold, crisp kind of morning that tingles your lungs awake, when I noticed a man and his young son standing by the fence. The boy couldn't have been more than 6, juice box in hand, eyes wide as if meeting a legend. "Daddy," he whispered, "is this the electric cowboy fence?" His father laughed, embarrassed. "Yes, son, this is the one." I approached, tipped my hat. "Don't worry," I said. "It's deactivated for now." The boy squinted up at me. "Mister, did you really zap a whole neighborhood?" I chuckled. "No, son. I just reminded them where their neighborhood concludes." The boy stared at me as if I'd revealed a universal secret. His father nodded respectfully. "We appreciate your actions. Folks around here needed to witness someone hold their ground." We shook hands. They walked off, the boy still chattering about electricity, cowboys, and fences that made the news. I stood there a moment longer, watching the sunrise crest the hills, illuminating the land my grandfather left me, the land I'd defended, the land that would remain Dawson land long after I'm gone. The fence hummed faintly in the morning breeze, steady as a heartbeat. It was no longer merely wire and voltage. It was a pledge, a line drawn in Texas soil, and a reminder to anyone who forgets that some land isn't for sale, isn't for taking, and most assuredly isn't for a community association to claim. Not now. Not ever.